Well, it's lovely to see so many people gathered here in Hobart somehow. It still seems extraordinary to me that we can gather this way, online, and increasingly in this blended format that I can see is happening right here now in your dojo there in Hobart. It's wonderful that we are slowly returning to the physical, face-to-face, body-to-body contact of sharing this practice with each other. And yet we're sharing it all the time, are we not? With every breath and step of our lives, we are sharing this great matter, this great mystery of life and death, the great mystery of one moment astonishingly becoming the next moment, becoming the next moment. How does this happen? And yet here it is, happening all the time, requiring no effort, just constantly inviting us to participate, to settle deeper and ever deeper into this mystery, this moment, this breath. And today I want to look a little bit at this settling, the way we settle into this practice. For anybody who's been on a extended Zen retreat called Sesshin, they will be aware that Sesshin means to settle the mind, to touch the mind, and to convey the mind. Now, these three qualities of settling, touching, conveying are teased out here in the name Sesshin. But of course, there's no teasing them out in actuality. To settle the mind is to touch the mind. To touch the mind is to convey the mind. Our entire practice is devoted to actualizing the seamlessness of these so-called three. So what is it to settle the mind, touch the mind, convey the mind? Well, the old teachers were always so gracious. They'd always say simple things like, just find a quiet place to settle down and allow your body and mind to drop into what is. Just allowing this Sunday morning period to be, just to gather here with other people. Are you not already settling and touching and conveying your deepest intention, your deepest desire, if you like, to wake up entirely into the life that has been so amazingly given to you? How it is given, no one can say. But what a shame to miss this life, to find ourselves mired in endless versions or interpretations of what is going on, all the while failing to roll our sleeves up and get involved. So this settling of the mind is not something that we do with a kind of push. In fact, we allow all pushing to fall away. That's the secret of allowing the body and mind to fall away. There's nothing to do. When we settle onto our cushion here in Zazen, we can completely let go. There is nothing being asked of us here but to let go. To trust that, of course, the moment has already arrived. There's nothing to pursue. We just open our eyes to this fact. And what comes flooding in when we do? That's the great adventure of Zazen. To see what keeps flooding through, flooding right through the open door of making ourselves available, letting life flow. What ease and joy there is in allowing life to move and turn and even twist in whatever direction it wants to go, without our interference, without our tampering, without our tinkering, without our petty desires to improve it or tailor it or manipulate it to our so-called advantage. One of the great adventurers of our way was the poet and great fool, Ryokan. Many of you, I know, are familiar with the wonderful and funny and wise and startling enterprises of this Ryokan. He's a great gift to our tradition because he does not appear in the monastery. In fact, even though he was invited to become a successor in his line of teaching, he realized that was not his way. His way was going to be wandering as a mendicant monk in the mountains and fields and villages of his home area, having no formal support from an institution, but wandering free as the breeze, wandering at random, if you like, allowing the whole world to wander as him, not picking and choosing his direction, but simply flowing with, like water. Like water settles down, finds its settled place, flows with things, flows around obstacles, meeting up with itself at every point. Water is not something that can be defined, not something that can be even easily spoken about. So Ryokan moved through his life like water, entered our lives like water, clear water, lighting up the sparkle of that water for each of us. And I'll read you one of his poems. He wrote many poems. He was a fine calligrapher. And even though he existed in a very small hut some of the time, other times he was left lying in the rain, other times he was taking shelter in somebody's house or barn with the animals or children. But wherever he went, if he was able to find some paper and a brush, very treasured items for Ryokan, he would brush a poem, sometimes in exchange for some food or lodging. And I'll read you one of those poems now, which I think helps to show just what it's like to live as this water, to settle into life, no matter what shape life takes. He says, desire nothing, and you're content with everything. Pursue things, and you're thwarted at every turn. Wild greens can stave off hunger. A simple robe serves to cover the skin. Going for a solitary walk, I fall in with the deer. When the children from the village sing, I join right in at the top of my lungs. I cleanse my ears in the sound of the water tumbling over rocks, and gladden my heart with the whisper of pines high on the mountain peaks. Can you hear how this is turning with circumstances? Can you hear how falling in with the deer, falling in with the children, is not resisting the way life is going at all? And I even love the example that Ryokan sets even further than this joyous note that he strikes, this harmonious quality that he shares in the poem that I just read to you. Because Ryokan was not afraid to also turn with the more difficult aspects of his life, the more fraught dimensions, the unsettling aspects of being awake and alive on this planet right now. After all, when has this life not included both the joys and sorrows demanded of any life truly walked and lived on this ground, this sharp ground that we call the earth? This is not some sort of idealized perfect world, although at heart it is absolutely perfect. But to really appreciate the flavor of this perfection requires that we do not flinch away or turn away or reject the more trying, difficult, troublesome aspects of this life. So listen to Ryokan on another occasion. This time he says, sitting alone in my empty room, my mind restless and downcast, I saddle my horse and ride far, far away. 100 cares line my brow, 10,000 troubles rend my heart. I want to return, but I've lost the way back. Here it is, the end of another year. What am I to do? Can you hear the lament, the grief, the confusion, the anxiety, the mourning in all of this, the loneliness of it? Can you recall that some days in your own life you may find yourself exactly that lonely, exactly that burdened with trouble, exactly that bewildered about how on earth I got here? Why me? Why now? Why is this happening? And yet, even when Ryokan shares this inevitable side of living awake on this earth, notice that he has not turned away. Notice that he hasn't tried to carefully edit that part out from his life. This too is me, he says. And even more, I feel I can hear in this very verse that identifies all of this woe, if you like. There's a deep okayness here too. Something more like a generous appreciation that this too is the way things are And that's okay. That's not something I'm going to flee from. That's not something I'm going to refuse. I'm going to allow whatever state I find myself in to inform me completely. And I want to add that it is so often the case that these difficult states, these awkward moments, these are the very ones that break our heart open wider and wider and wider still, whenever we stay with them, whenever we acknowledge them, let them in, see what it is that they are freeing us from, actually. You could call this courageous work, brave work, but it's also just simple work. After all, when we sit on this cushion, settle down into this cushion, and just allow whatever is to appear just as it is this not the simplest thing in the world to do? Isn't this great ease and joy, no matter what is arising? Well, this is the great invitation of Zazen. And it's the invitation and example set well by all of the great teachers in our line, all of the great teachers of Buddhism throughout its tradition, going all the way back to Shakyamuni himself. And there's a beautiful little case that I encountered recently in a new collection of koan cases, well, newly translated collection of koan cases called The Record of Empty Hall. These cases were compiled by Zhu Tang, a 12th to 13th century master. And Zhu Tang also, at the end of each of the cases that he assembled in this collection of 100 koans, would offer himself a little turning word, a little statement or phrase, another teaching spark. And this he does with a case 2, actually, from this collection, which I'll share with you now because it touches on so much of what I've already been speaking to this morning. The case is called The World Honored One Cares for Each and Goes. The World Honored One, of course, being Shakyamuni, the great spark of our line. And here is the case. An outsider asked the World Honored One, "Yesterday, what Dharma did you express?" The World Honored One said, "Settled Dharma." The outsider again asked, "Today, what Dharma did you express?" The World Honored One said, "Unsettled Dharma." The outsider said, "Yesterday settled. Today, why unsettled?" The World Honored One said, "Yesterday settled. Today, unsettled." And on behalf of the outsider, our friend Zhu Tang, compiler of this collection of koans, said, "Caring for each and going. Caring for each and going." So let's have a little look at this case, a very interesting case, touching on the very nature of Dharma, settled, unsettled. And it starts with this outsider, the outsider who comes to the World Honored One. And of course, this would have been an outsider as someone new to the way, perhaps from another tradition. Who knows the attributes of this particular person, but there are many stories of a so-called outsider appearing to ask and inquire of the Buddha when he was teaching in one of his open teaching settings, perhaps in the Deer Park, something like that. So it's interesting, someone fresh, if you like. Someone comes in and asks, yesterday, what Dharma did you express? What have you been teaching? And the Buddha said, settled Dharma. I wonder what you hear in these words, settled Dharma. Perhaps the quality of things just as they are. Perhaps you can even hear an echo of Ryokan's first poem there. Things just as they are, no complaints. Everything moving just as it is. Settled with no friction. But then the outsider goes on to ask, today, what Dharma did you express? And now the world-honored one says, unsettled Dharma. How interesting. How interesting. Unsettled Dharma. What's the outsider going to do with this? And perhaps we even go there. You might be able to relate, as I'm sure Ryokan could relate, to unsettled states of being, just as we've been exploring. We have, after all, lived through a very unsettling time, have we not, over the last 18 months? I think so much of that unsettling Dharma, unsettled Dharma, is still absolutely at play in the way we try to find our feet on this shifting ground of not even post-COVID. We are still very much in the COVID reality. So much to explore, so much to realize on this shifting ground of COVID, of pandemic. So the outsider says, yesterday settled, today, why unsettled? And there is so much in this why. I'm sure we can all relate to this why. Why was it like that before and why is it like this now? What's going on? Why is it happening to me? Why is it happening like this? Why do I have to now do it this way? Why can't I do it the way I'd like to do it? Why can't things just be easier? All of this is at play in this outsider's question. Yesterday settled, today why unsettled? And the world-honored one responds, handing it right back to this outsider. Yesterday settled, today unsettled. Can you hear the complete acceptance of this fact offered by Shakyamuni here? Yesterday settled, today unsettled. Tomorrow settled. Last moment settled, this moment settled. Unsettled, settled, settled, unsettled. When we really start to look, it's very hard to actually tell these things apart. When does the settling end and the unsettling begin? When does the unsettling end and the settling begin? What is the Dharma of settling and unsettling? Well, again, some of the people here will be familiar with a sutra that we sometimes recite at session and in other occasions. And that is the Liberation Within Obstruction Sutra. And I won't try to look at all of that in any kind of detail now, but there is a beautiful, I call it a cascade at the heart of this sutra, where there is an invitation to, if there is cost, I choose to pay. If there is mourning, I choose to grieve. When it is my death, I choose to die. When it is my birth, I choose to be born. Whatever the circumstances are, I choose to be with. The whole sutra makes a bow to the practice of turning with circumstances, joining in, as I've said earlier. This is very much at the heart of yesterday settled, today unsettled. You might even like to practice with, if you find yourself in a very unsettled place, you might even be able to just note to yourself, unsettled Dharma. Or if you're in a zazen of great samadhi and peace, you may even just breathe, settled Dharma. In both cases, it is embodying what is completely. No resistance, no holding back, but respecting, admiring, being with the many beings of this world. And that's where I'm very interested too, that Zhu Tang, our commentator and cheeky voice at the end of each one of these cases, says something very, very moving. He says, on behalf of the outsider, caring for each and going. Caring for each and going. What's he pointing to here? Take it up as a practice, caring for each and going. You might take that as caring for each state we find ourselves in, and then taking the next step. Caring for each being that we encounter. Doing what we can to be with them completely. And then taking the next step to encounter again and again and again. This is not a forced kind of practice. It is entirely natural. It is entirely natural to take the next step into the next moment, to really wake up into the unfolding nature of this reality. Nothing stays still. Nothing has unchanging self. So we must be able to join with and let go into the next moment. That is the great settling, to be unsettled into our settling. And I love that the word care is introduced here too. Care actually has a very interesting etymology. At the root of the word care actually is the word for mourning, for loss. I'll just quickly see if I can find you here the etymology, and here it is. In Old English, it comes from karu, which is of Germanic origin, and that means grief, lament. And in Old Norse, it even has a suggestion of sickbed. So how interesting that care comes from an appreciation of loss, an aliveness to the fact that everything we love, we will lose. The preciousness of this moment has already moved on. How interesting that when we open our eyes to that fact, it doesn't make us nihilistic in any kind of way, but inspires a deep and abiding and tender care for everything that we encounter. At the last session, we touched on a fragment of a poem by Louise Gluck, who says, "Why love what you will lose? There is nothing else to love." Why love what you will lose? There is nothing else to love. The great waves of worry and concern, unsettling states you might call them, are no other than the voice of love itself, our love for the people we share this life with, the love for the world that is so embattled right now. We feel unsettled, and appropriately so. But it's only when we can deeply settle into that very large, powerful, wide open state of loving even what we might lose, what we will, of course, lose, given that everything is transient. It's only when we can inhabit that completely, embody it fully, that we can truly be awake and honor our vow to save the many beings, to be here completely, to take this next step along with all of the dharmas, all of the creatures and unknowable, unsayable things that make this life what it is, make us who we are. So turning with our circumstances, caring for each. Notice how particular this is, caring for each one, each particular thing, caring for each and going. So we can take up some of these themes in the shared time of inquiry that we have next, and perhaps we'll toss in a few other koans to support and look at other aspects of this question of what it is to settle into this life and truly discover the full spectrum of what it's like to be awake and available in this life.